All right, folks, let's jump into the next topic video, which is anxiety and depression. The first thing that I want to say is that for those of you who've experienced anxiety and depression, I know how encompassing it can be. I know how debilitating it can be. I've seen it in patients for years, but this might be the biggest red pill you'll ever have to swallow, and it has to be done. And the preface that I want to start with is that anxiety and depression is not a condition. It is not a diagnosis. It is a symptom. That is the first clinical pearl. Now, I know that might irritate some people, especially because if you've experienced this before, you know how intense it can be. And the two things I want to say to that are one, the truth will set you free. It might piss you off first, though. And two is the concept that when you experience something for so long, when you have symptoms for so long, it's hard to picture yourself without them. And it almost becomes part of your identity. What you need is a perspective change. Because if you identify with your symptoms, if you look at yourself with your symptoms as one and the same, like I mentioned in the adrenal video, this will be one of the hardest hills you'll have to climb in your health. And I get it. When you don't know what it's like to feel well for years or decades, it becomes like your symptoms are your possessions. Your depression is you, your anxiety is you. And I hope that this video lands the way that I intend for it to land for you. And more importantly, it lands the way that you need it to. And so I had to start with that because I get it. But a perspective change and shift might be exactly what you need to be able to digest the rest of this video. So with that said, let's jump in. How common is anxiety and depression? Everyone who's watching this video either has had at some point in their life or has anxiety or depression, or you know at least one other person in your life who has it or has experienced it. Now, all those trusted sources like the CDC and all those people will say that there's about 280 million cases worldwide of anxiety and depression diagnosed each year. Now, I think that's pretty conservative, to be honest. I think it's well beyond that. But still, 280 million is nothing to laugh at, right? And so that's a lot of people. Now, let's talk about the symptoms. Because I want you, if you guys have been following along with me, if you're new to the membership, welcome. But if you've been here for a while and watch all the videos, you're going to see exactly where I'm going with this. And that's where we're going to go next. So we're going to go over what are some of the most common aspects of anxiety and depression. I obviously have my notepad because if not, I'm trying to make this less than an hour for one time. And if I didn't have notes, I'd probably rant on here for like 3 hours. So I need to be efficient for all of you, or as we say in Tennessee, for all of y'all. Okay, so I made a list. What does this all sound like? Feelings of overwhelmed, can't handle stress, trouble sleeping, irritable and agitated, appetite changes, weight changes, difficult to focus, frequent headaches, pain, GI issues, excessive worry, emotional outburst, secluding yourself, seclusion, fixated on negative thoughts, fatigue, and hopeless. Those are the ones that I wrote down. Now, if you're trying to figure out what I'm going to say, all those symptoms, right, sound like a gut and hormone issue because that's exactly what it is, right? Neurotransmitters, which we'll get into in a second, is literally a hormone that has its actions taking place in the nervous system. So when we talk about estrogen, progesterone, and all the hormone videos that we've done thus far, they're all the same. But when they act in the nervous system, they're known as neurotransmitters. And what have I said? And now all of y'all know, it is never the message. It is always the messenger. So I want you to marinate with that while I kind of go down the rest of this video, and it'll make sense. It'll all come together towards the end. So next thing, Big study came out analyzing a bunch of studies, and it said that, okay, well, after all these years, low serotonin in the blood does not really cause depression. Now, I'm going to say three things about that. The first one is I agree that it is not the cause. The second one is that I believe it is extremely related, and being related and the cause of are two totally different things, right? The third thing that I will say is that testing for neurotransmitters, I've never found it to be very accurate. They did blood in those studies. Many people will do urine, and maybe urine's more accurate, but neurotransmitters change so fast from moment to moment that you can do a test now and in 10 minutes do the same test and they'll be wildly different. They say that the only true indication of neurotransmitters affecting your brain and nervous system is a cerebral spinal fluid sample, which is, not the easiest test to gather. And so the tests don't take into account the receptors, doesn't take into account toxicity, it doesn't take anything into account. So going off of laboratory testing is not the most efficient and effective way to measure your neurotransmitters. Your symptomatology with them is the most accurate. And so we'll get into those next. Now, there's three main neurotransmitters. There's really two, but I throw in a third because I think it's the most missed. So number one and number two is serotonin and dopamine. Everyone knows that that's where I was going, but let's talk a little bit about the symptoms of when they're too high or too low. So serotonin and dopamine, whenever they are too high, so say serotonin or dopamine is high, you're going to be prone to anxiety. Okay, so if they're too high, anxiety. If they are both too high, that's OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a big one a lot of people ask me about. So this is all the stuff we're talking about is going to be the root cause of all this. Okay. Now, if your serotonin is high, you have anxiety and aggression. But if your dopamine is high, then you have anxiety and ADD. Okay. If they are low, then serotonin being low is an agitated depression. So they're both going to be depression, but serotonin low is more of the agitated version. So it's like the people who want to go out and tell everybody how depressed they are. The dopamine low is more of the seclusion, the secluding depression. So you want to stay in your basement. You don't want bright lights. You want to just be by yourself. You don't want to be around people. That is the main difference in depressions between the two. Now, if serotonin's low, you'll also have lack of joy, which is why you'll see people with low serotonin who had a passion and all of a sudden they're like, I don't really do that anymore. Dopamine low is more of, it leads to addiction, right? Dopamine is your reward centers. So people who get addicted to anything, gambling, drugs, sex, whatever, they have a dopamine issue. Now, with dopamine, the people who have low dopamine are the ones who lose their temper easy and cannot adapt well to stress. And so for that, when you can't adapt well to stress, what do you turn to? Addictions, right? That kind of helps relieve your stress. Whenever there's a serotonin issue, you also got to start thinking insomnia because serotonin and melatonin are related. Now, insomnia will be actually the next topic video that I'm going to do after we do this one. So serotonin and dopamine, I just broke down if it's too high, too low, or if they're both too high or both too low. The one that gets missed out all the time that I just find every day, I find that people have GABA issues. GABA is your main inhibitory neurotransmitter of your nervous system. So it puts the brake on your stress. When GABA is low, it's anxiety, panic attacks, big with low GABA, panic attacks. And another one is worry and overwhelmed. People who are, think about it, anxious, worried, panic, and overwhelmed. That more likely sounds like most people compared to serotonin and dopamine. And one other thing that you'll have with low GABA is prone to seizures. And I know I've talked about that in past videos, but truth withstands time. It's the same thing on this video. So GABA is a big one. And I would say this is the number one missed neurotransmitter. Clinical pearl for GABA is people who are low in GABA love to sleep with the TV on. Reason why that is because when you have no GABA, your mind is all over the place. Your mind doesn't shut down. You're thinking 1,000 thoughts a minute. When it's low, you're sleepless and you're very irritated. So that sounds like a lot of people that you guys know, right? We'll get into the cause of all this stuff. I'm just setting the ground rules here. Okay, so next I put is, what does Western medicine say causes anxiety and depression, and what is their treatment? So number one, they're not too far off on what they say, shockingly, causes it. And what they say is that it's an accumulation of stressful events in your life. I agree with that. I think that is 100% accurate. There is a saying that your body keeps score. So every stress you've ever felt or experienced or anticipated gets stored in your cells, and you experience that in your physiology. Now, here's where I don't agree with them is they say, and then diabetes and cancer and medical diagnoses like that cause depression, anxiety. I would say that the causes of those, of the diabetes and cancer, is also what causes anxiety, depression. Does that make sense? So I get where they're coming from. Like you had a diagnosis that, hurts you emotionally. I get that. But the cause of those diagnoses is the same thing that causes your anxiety, depression from a root cause level. Now, here's where they fail. They fail with their treatments because the medical Western medicine paradigm is not focused on root causes. What they want to do is use SSRIs and drugs alike to change your chemicals. And all they're really doing is putting people in what I like to call chemical straitjackets. They're trying to numb you because they don't know how to change your physiology from an emotional standpoint. So they try to change your neurotransmitters, which according to their studies has nothing to do with anxiety and depression, which is ironic to me. Now, if you look at the side effects of SSRIs, a lot of them have the same side effects as what they're trying to treat. Depression, anxiety, harmful thoughts, suicidal thoughts, aggression, all of that stuff. You just watch one commercial, more than 75% of the commercial is the side effects. And so I always found that interesting. Like, okay, so a side effect of the med is exactly what they're trying to treat with that med. What sense does that make? And one thing that I will say is that Western medicine's approach to treating people's emotional trauma and the response to it creates monsters. And it will make more sense when I get further in this video, because I will talk about that one more time and it'll click for you and you'll realize what mistakes we're making. So last thing I wrote down too is at the end of the video, I'm going to also talk about when people want to get off SSRIs, just some basic concepts that have to be in place. So what is Dr. Charlie's take on all this? You just told me Western medicines. What do you think about this? Well, my thought process on anxiety and depression is literally the symptoms of a result of a society that creates these issues, and the issues cannot be handled with emergency medicine philosophies. So society, right? We want to make everything. What do I always say? I always say that whenever we're trying to improve society, the number one question we have to ask is, at what cost to our health? I've said it in the trenches. I've said it on Red Pill Your Healthcast. I've said it on Instagram. I've said it all over the place. And what I mean by that is, think about it. Electronics. Every time we try to make something more efficient, it usually is going to harm our physiology in some fashion. And technology is like numero uno, and we are obsessed with technology. I love technology too, but I also recognize what it's doing to us. So I wrote some down. I wrote down fast food, right? People have no time. Here's your fast food. It's nutrient depleted, and without nutrients, nothing works properly. We have computers. We have electronic watches now that lay on acupuncture meridians. We have little cell phones in our pockets at all times. People still use microwaves. We're trying to save the environment with these electric cars. Now we're sitting on a microwave with wheels, essentially. We have a bunch of stuff that is supposedly making us better, but it's breaking us down. We put pesticides on everything. We spray our lawns with neurotoxins. We inject our kids and ourselves with vaccines. We hand out birth control like Pez. We hand out antibiotics like Pez. And the side effect of antibiotic is depression, if you read the labels. All that plus all the endocrine disruptors in our society. I've talked ad nauseum about these things. All of that leads into a society that creates toxicity for us. And we are goldfish living in a dirty aquarium. The issue is that we can't clean our aquarium. So we have to control the controllables by building our constitution. And that's what we'll go over in this video and in previous videos. Now, all of that, now you add in emotional trauma, childhood trauma, that's like adding fuel to the fire. It just enhances everything. And it's a two-way street. You know, emotional realities and what's happened to us in our life needs to be dealt with. But it's a lot harder to deal with that stuff when our physiology is fighting off all this toxicity around us all the time. Now, the next thing that we've done is we're starting to see that after decades of doing all this toxicity stuff that I just mentioned, we're starting to see the epigenetic shift in our population. We're starting to see fertility issues. We're starting to see all these things that, you know, like autism and all the stuff that if you ask people 30, 40 years ago, it didn't really exist. It was much more rare than it is now. And so what we've done is we've created this epigenetic shift in billions of people. And then those people rely on the people who are responsible for creating it in the first place or affiliated with the people who create this in the first place. And what Einstein said was that you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. And so when we subscribe to things like holistic medicine and natural medicine, and really, it's really the oldest form of medicines. When people are not at that consciousness, not in that frequency, they look at us like quacks. They look at us like we're crazy because they're so conditioned to think a certain way. And I will say this along those lines is that the further that we get away from nature, the more anxious and depressed we will become. That is facts. I guarantee you, we cannot overcome Mother Nature. So next thing I put, dropped my pen. Next thing I put was, what are the causes of anxiety and depression? And the big takeaway that I want you guys to really understand is the big picture is inflammation. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I'm just going to say it because if you've been in the trenches with me, you totally get it, is that just like anxiety and depression, inflammation is still a symptom. It's not a root cause. And that's what we're going to get into, the root causes of inflammation. But know that in the presence of inflammation, because we need a little bit of inflammation in our body to regulate processes and stuff like that. But when that's properly regulated, anxiety and depression cannot exist. It's impossible. You can't be anxious and or depressed and have proper inflammatory levels. Absolutely impossible. So, numero uno, the gut-brain axis, and in parentheses, adrenals. Now, this is where we're starting because, as we say, the gut is the second brain. However, here's a statistic and here's a clinical pearl. 10%, so between gut and brain, the brain has 10% of nerves going from brain to gut. Say there's 100%, okay? 10% is brain to gut. 90% is gut to brain. So who's really in control in that situation? It's your gut. And now, what affects the gut? Dysbiosis, leaky gut, right? You've heard these terms. We've talked about these terms. Now, what dysbiosis does is create LPS. I talked about in the autism video, lipopolysaccharides. When those get into your blood and into your system and go to different organs like your brain, that creates massive amounts of inflammation. And in Biology 101, there is a saying that is structure dictates function. And so when we change receptors, when we change tissues of the body, the function will change. We change the messenger. You follow me? So these infections, I have some clinical pearls on them. The number one, parasites, right? I say it all the time. Everyone kind of thinks of me as the parasite guy, even though I'm really not. It's just they're that common. But what I'll find is parasites are the number one infection that cause anxiety. Now, if you've watched the parasite video, you understand that, because what does it do? It secretes ammonia. What does ammonia deplete? GABA. So when you have no GABA, you are overwhelmed, sleepless, anxious, panic attacks, seizures, list goes on, right? For depression, and just like, I should say that any of these infections can cause both. This is just what I find most commonly. It does not mean that it's not possible for other stuff. It's just my experience, as I've always said. The two most common infections that create more depression, in my experience, is viruses like Epstein-Barr, cytomegalo, and all those herpes family viruses, and candida, fungal yeast. The reason why is because those are the most common infections I find that creates fatigue. And depression and fatigue, chronic fatigue, seem very similar in their symptomatology. Now, bacteria goes either way. I haven't really pinpointed that down. So it could be either way. But think about it this way. When you have an acute illness, like a flu or a common cold, are you happy-go-lucky? Are you seeing the beauty of life? Or are you wanting to lay in bed and not feeling great, feeling down, whatever it is? Seems a lot like depression, doesn't it? And so what I say is that if you have that in acute illness, acute infections, what about these chronic infections that each day at low levels affect your physiology? Now, maybe your anxiety and your depression, more so your depression, is a symptom that's telling you that you need to rest and recover from something. That is a huge clinical pearl. This is the perspective change that I really want to land for you guys. Now, what happens in this chronic illness is what we covered in our adrenal video, right? Our adrenal secretes cortisol, and at first it's anti-inflammatory. But remember, that's a short-term system that we employ long-term because we're humans. And over time, what does that do? It puts you into a catabolic state, a state of breakdown. And that breakdown is your blood-brain barrier, your gut barrier, the barriers of your body. Structure dictates function. And so now you're breaking down your barrier systems because your stress hormone is not regulated. Now the receptors don't work. Now neurotransmitters become off. Now hormones, now you start breaking down. That can look like anxiety and depression. Do you see where I'm going with that? Now, here's another statistic. 95% of your serotonin is produced in your gut, and 50% of your dopamine is produced in your gut. Think about that, folks. If the gut integrity is off, if the structure is off, the function is off. So if the gut is off, there goes 95% of your serotonin and 50% of your dopamine. Don't you think that's important? Why don't we look more to the gut? All right. Number 2, you gotta drink water. I'm going in on this one, folks. Number 2, blood sugar. Your mood mimics your blood sugar. You ever been hangry in your life, right? You're hungry and angry. That's because your blood sugar is not stable. And we need sugar for our cells. Glucose is a major energy source for our cells and for our brain. Now, here's what happens is we're so focused on high blood sugar, but we live most of our life in low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. And what happens is the brain is needing sugar, but if the body doesn't have enough for the brain and body will fight over those sugar stores. They'll play a tug of war. Do you think that can be anxiety or panic or overwhelm to your physiology? You better believe it. And so blood sugar is absolutely crucial in handling anxiety and depression. I think, without going any further, if you handle your gut microbiome and your blood sugar, I think you'll tackle 90% plus of depression, anxiety. 90% plus. A high carbohydrate, I can't speak. A high carbohydrate diet will stop tryptophan, which is the amino acid that turns into serotonin. It will block it from getting through the blood-brain barrier. So again, we'll talk about diets and stuff, but think about that when we talk about carbohydrates and sugars, it stops your amino acids from turning into your neurotransmitters. So number 3, environmental toxins. I made a list, folks. I made a list. Number 1, vaccines. We inject them in our youth when their blood-brain barrier is compromised. Vaccines destroy your methylation. They really set you up for so much methylation issues, which we'll talk about in a moment. So after vaccines, we got foods. What do foods do? Well, 1, if you're eating food sensitivities, it secretes histamine. Histamine it gets you going, right? It's not just hives and skin stuff. It's also a potent stimulant of the adrenal glands. And when your adrenal glands are stimulated, there goes your adrenaline, your cortisol, there goes high dopamine, there goes anxiety. So foods are huge. And I'm not even talking about all the colors and dyes and fillers and all the garbage. I'm even just talking about your food sensitivities. If you're on gluten or dairy, or maybe you're sensitive to egg or nightshades or caffeine, we have to understand our food sensitivities. And if you have a ton of them, that means that your gut is compromised. So the more sensitivities you have, the more damage your gut barrier and the integrity of your gut is lowered. Next, and I'm going to do a video on foods in the future. I have my next ones planned out. I'm going to do insomnia next, followed by mold, and then followed by EMF. And next is mold. So mold is a monster. Man, is it a monster. And it will basically disrupt every neurotransmitter pathway. It will create leaky gut, which creates leaky brain. And if black mold and things like that get into your brain and it gets into the prefrontal cortex, now your dopamine is compromised. So there goes depression. And mold really accelerates glutamate in your body, which is a very excitatory neurotransmitter. And that's like you've heard that Chinese food and Asian cuisine use MSG. That's monosodium glutamate, which is a neurotoxin. And so the mold increases your glutamate. And we'll talk about the methylation pathway, but you're supposed to break down glutamate into GABA, right? GABA is a big deal. So mold is an absolute must when you are starting to get things like anxiety and depression, when you move into a new house or a new area. That is absolutely a must to check. But yeah, it's a beast. So mold is crucial as well. After that, I put medications, right? Antibiotics. The side effect is depression, destroys your good gut bacteria. So there goes more. Structure dictates function, changes the LPS, changes the brain, all that type of stuff. Birth control, steroids. I mean, the list goes on. I'm preaching to the choir. I get it. But what did I say? What did Einstein say? You can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. That can hit home for a lot of people right there. Next, EMF. Now I'm going to do a full video on EMF, but EMF is a big deal. It depletes your B6. Without B6, you don't methylate, you don't produce glutathione. Glutathione is the master antioxidant for your barrier systems. So you have something that we're swimming in all day long, these Wi-Fis and stuff, that is depleting that. The other 2 things I always say is that your gut microbiome is sensitive to EMFs. And so, computers, Wi-Fi, electric cars, microwaves literally destroy your gut bacteria, your good gut bacteria. And next one is pretty fascinating is our brain waves basically function between 0.5 and 35 hertz per second. 5G operates at 28 to 39 billion hertz per second. So imagine those waves always going through us. Even though they're non-ionizing, they still affect us, folks. I'll get into a whole video on it for you guys. But think about that. That can create massive anxiety, massive sleep issues. I mean, I see it day in and day out. And so To say that it's not affecting us is just ignorant. I say it's like the modern day smoking. If we knew what we knew about smoking and big tobacco 50 years ago, would doctors be telling you their favorite cigarette brands? Probably not. And so EMF is one of those things. So we will touch on it in its own video, but we need to mention it here. Last one I wrote down is pesticides, right? Glyphosate. Man, glyphosate is a beast too. Like mold, it's just so toxic. And all the other pesticides that are sprayed, the fungicides, the chemtrails. You hear me talking about Takasumi all the time in my stories on Instagram. But pesticides block tryptophan. They block amino acid use. So there goes your raw building blocks to neurotransmitters. It's crazy. And here's Clinical Pearl. What's the rate limiting step to detoxification? Gallbladder, right? Here's the thing about gallbladder, right? Because the phase 3 detox is the liver starts doing its thing and then it has to dump into the gallbladder, which dumps into the small intestine so that you excrete it. In Chinese medicine, every organ is related to multiple emotions. Gallbladder just so happens to be related to depression. And so if your detoxification is clogged, you will be set up for depression. There's your symptom, right? The other clinical pearl is the heart is actually related to anxiety. And we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, number 4, methylation. This is crucial. I would say if you can do your gut microbiome, your blood sugar, and optimize your methylation, I think you'll fix 100% of anxiety and depression. So in my experience, 50 to 75% of methylation, and when I'm testing people, because I have different vials of methylation pathways and stuff, what I find clinically is that when I check people's methylation, maybe 5 different genetic SNPs will show. And then I'll ask with hand modes, what's the priority toxin? Find the toxin, find the remedies, put those remedies on the body, and then I will rescan the methylation pathways, and 50 to 75%, sometimes more, is no longer needed support from a methylation standpoint. So 50 to 75% or more is actually due to toxicity creatine deficiency. Now, in my experience, the most common I call them priority toxins. Number 1, parasites. Number 2, pesticides. And I would say number 3 is fungus and mold. That's probably the top 3 I find. The one that comes in after that is heavy metals. So parasites and pesticides with molds and yeasts or fungus, same thing. And then metals. And the 2 things that are constant in the human experience that clog every single methylation pathway is mental emotional stress and EMFs. So that is what I find destroys our methylation. I'm going to talk about 4 genes, 4 genetic SNPs that I see that really contribute to anxiety and depression. Now, number 1 is called the COMT gene. Now, what that gene does is it breaks down your estrogens, your serotonin, your adrenaline, and your dopamine. So if we don't have that functioning properly, we are not breaking down any of that stuff. And remember, if serotonin's high, if dopamine's high, if adrenaline's high, crazy amount of anxiety. COMT people do terrible with caffeine. And this is one of 2 of the most common genetic SNPs that I see clinically. The next one is the VDRs, vitamin D receptor. This is going to be a big clinical pearl for this video. But one of the things that will clog this receptor is Epstein-Barr virus. And then it's getting this receptor going that helps you overcome Epstein-Barr. After that, the MAO gene. Now, this is the gene that will give you a lot of personality disorders. This is the gene that breaks down your serotonin. Okay, so if the MAO is not working, your serotonin doesn't get broken down. Now, COMT gene and MAO both break down serotonin. So remember those 2 because we're coming back to those 2. And the 4th one is the GAD gene. This is what gets glutamate to GABA. They say it's the one that's really associated as well with bipolar. So that's a really big one to know. And we will cover all four of these now. So number one, I'm going with the VDR gene, vitamin D receptor. The reason why I'm going with that is because this is the rate limiting step in the creation of serotonin and dopamine. Because vitamin D receptor is what controls the enzymes that turn the amino acids into the neurotransmitters. So, for instance, tryptophan is turned into serotonin, and tyrosine is turned into dopamine. So if your VDRs, which I find about 90% of my patient population have an issue with VDRs, if we don't have proper VDR efficiency, we're not creating neurotransmitters of dopamine and serotonin in the first place. So that's a rate limiting step right there. Two other clinical pearls. I wasn't going to say this, but I am going to say it because I just want to help you guys out. The VDRs also regulate the NOS gene, which is the gene that does your nitric oxide. And people who are prone to parasites and SIBO, well, more so parasites, need this gene upregulated. It's usually low, but remember it's turned on by VDR, so you still got to go VDR. And the people who have chronic SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth issues, the VDR receptor and that's influence on people is what gets people over SIBO, or more so from reoccurring SIBO, because we do need herbs and stuff to get rid of stuff, but then supporting methylation to prevent it in the future is a really good idea. Okay. So I'll talk about when I say how to treat this type of stuff, how we support the VDRs. But now if we support that, we got to support the MAO and the COMT. The reason why is because the MAO gene, which breaks down your serotonin, also known as the warrior gene, because if you don't break down your serotonin, you are aggressive, right? You get aggression. Now, that will lead to, if it's too high, anxiety and aggression, which is great for warriors who want to fight because they'll go mad, they'll go nuts. But not good for us. And so if that has an issue, that has to be addressed. Then that goes down into the COMT gene, those enzymes, which further degrades serotonin, estrogen, dopamine, and adrenaline. Okay. So here is a big, I'm getting back to my clinical pearl. If your MAO and your COMT gene are not functioning properly, you'll have a ton of serotonin around, right? And adrenaline. Now, one thing you'll experience is OCD, right? So OCD, a lot of people ask me, like I said, COMT and MAO is what I would really try to balance. But if you have an issue in COMT and MAO, in that methylation, you also get intense aggression. And when you can't break down your serotonin, what are side effects of SSRIs? Anxiety and aggression, right? So what did I say? Western medicine's response to our traumas creates monsters. So if you load somebody up on SSRIs who can't process their adrenaline and their serotonin properly because of a COMT and an MAO issue, you could have just created the next school shooter. And that is why when those things happen, I don't go to guns. I go straight to what are we doing to our population? And so that is a huge, huge clinical pearl on what we need to change in our treatment of mental illness, because obviously SSRIs are not doing it. And I see the COMT gene, one of the two most common SNPs in practice. And so even if the MAO gene is good, and if the COMT gene ain't working, that serotonin, adrenaline ain't going anywhere. So the next one, the last one was the GAD gene, right? Turns glutamate into GABA. If there's an issue that will lead to anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenic, mold will shut this down. But what depletes GABA? Ammonia. And where does ammonia come from? Mostly parasites, sometimes yeast and fungus, but mainly parasites in my experience. And so if you deplete your GABA, and if say there's an issue with the GAD gene on top of having parasites, now you have no inhibitory neurotransmitter. You have no brake to your central nervous system. So you're anxious, overwhelmed, and panicked and sleepless, and your mind's not shutting down. That's why I say I feel like that is the most missed when it comes to anxiety and depression, because we put so much thought and talk into dopamine and serotonin. And don't get me wrong, they're crucial, but GABA is missed quite often. Number 5, hormones. I feel like I've beat this to death in people, so I don't want to go too much into it, but I did write that essentially serotonin mimics your estrogen. So if you have high estrogen dominance, you're going to have high serotonin, right? So estrogen dominance leads to high serotonin, which high serotonin is anxiety and aggression. And then estrogen governs the dopamine receptors in women, and testosterone governs the receptors in men. So hormones are very, very important. My mentor, Dr. Versendahl, would always say that he would call it libido. He would call happiness and getting through life libido. A lot of times people just think libido is sex drive. To him, it was like everything. And so he would say that, if you don't have hormones, you don't see in color. You're depressed, you're anxious. And so this is the mechanism of what was going on. And I'm wearing this type of bright color. So he would look at me and say, Dr. Charlie has good hormones. He's got good libido. Look at the colors he wears. He sees in color. And so that's where this kind of comes at. And again, progesterone affects GABA receptors. So remember, I'm doing all these videos in a certain order for the most part. And so when we talk about hormone videos that I've done in the adrenal video, it's very much related to this type of stuff. Postpartum depression, right? We talked about that in the adrenal video. When your adrenals are taxed, your dopamine's off. You have adrenal fatigue. We know now that it's mitochondrial adrenal fatigue. And if that's not secreting dopamine, and you've been relying on your baby's adrenals because they're adult size from the get-go, essentially, then you will go into a depression or anxiety or both. And last but not least, your thyroid hormone sensitizes all your cells to progesterone, and progesterone allows your thyroid hormone to work too. So the body is made so smartly. It's designed for a purpose. We're designed to thrive, not to die and be sick. So never blame the body. We got to see what's affecting us. And then it's not the messages, it's the messengers. You already know. You guys know the drill. You guys have watched some of my other stuff. So it's always what's affecting the messengers, not the messages. Then I wrote down emotional trauma and mental stress. Man, is this a doozy. This some people argue this is the most important. And Carl Jung or Carl Jung, still haven't figured out how to say his name, said that until you make the subconscious or unconscious conscious, it'll rule your life and you'll call it fate. And our society has been taught to try to be in a chemical straitjacket to deal with your emotions, and talk therapy. And talk therapy can be very effective for people, but I find it's generally not enough for most people because emotions live in our physiology, in our unconscious or subconscious. And until we find therapies that make them conscious and we deal with them, they still live in our cells and we still feel them. So what I say is that, I talked about, gallbladder being depression, but I think people walk around with broken hearts. In Chinese medicine, the heart houses the Shen. The Shen is the mind in Chinese medicine. And so if you ever have anxiety, they use heart 5, heart 7, heart 3, different acupuncture meridian points, because when you change the heart, you change the mind. And that Versendahl just really beat that into my head too, saying how the heart is the queen bee and everything sacrifices for the heart. So I think that all of our traumas, the accumulation of our traumas, just truly breaks our hearts. And as a society, until we deal with the physiology of it, we're walking around brokenhearted, and it's not a way to live. So a thing I also already told you is that mental stress and emotional stress, from breakups to your job, to your family dynamic, to whatever causes you stress, that clogs every single methylation pathway. And methylation happens a billion times a second. So now you are affecting your physiology a billion times a second. And over time, that will catch up to you. So we'll go into other things after. I think the next one is, so what do we do about it? Before that, the last one is concussions. If you've ever had a bad concussion that you know of or that you don't, Structure dictates function. So if you have brain inflammation, receptors won't work properly. You will develop anxiety, depression. Think about all the football players who end up committing suicide post-career because they take a lot of hits to their head. Clinical pearl with concussions, though, is you have something called the dura mater, which attaches in the brain. It surrounds the spinal cord and then attaches into the sacrum, which is like right in between your glutes, right? That's that triangle bone at the bottom. Your tailbone is connected to it. You can fall on your butt really bad or hit your tailbone really hard, and it will give you a concussion because that dura mater attaches down there and goes all the way up to the brain. So it's a 2-lane highway, similar to like gut to brain and vice versa. The dura mater goes from brain to sacrum. And I've had people fall or break a tailbone or a sacrum and they get concussion symptoms because of that relationship. So very important to talk about that. I would say that all the other causes I talked about are probably more common than concussion, but it's something that we need to address in anxiety, depression too. Okay, so first thing I'm going to say when I address how to go after all these things is I've talked about most of these things in other videos because all the same stuff causes our issues, but we just need to be able to learn how to connect them. And that's what I'm trying to do for y'all in this membership. So I will say that you probably have heard me talk about these already, but repetition is the father of learning. And this is hopefully giving you a perspective change on anxiety and depression with the stuff that you have heard. So number one, gut. If you clean your gut, you clean your brain. Write that down. You clean your gut, you clean your brain. Dysbiosis. That is unhealthy microbiome, bad bugs. So we talked about parasites. I did a whole video on there. So we know Malia, Vedanga, Mimosa, black walnut, and Artemisia, also known as wormwood. You can do some of those. You can choose one or two. That's what I usually do is I tell people choose one or two that resonate with you. The black walnut's liquid, so it's great for kids, but you can also use it as adults. I'm actually on it right now. And then if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, Illicium Supreme. Those are the main herbs for parasites. Fungal herbs, my favorite three: golden thread, morinda, and scutellaria. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, scutellaria, it comes in tincture for kids. Viral loads. So I'm talking chronic viruses. My favorite, Vervita Immune Armor, Olive Leaf Supreme, Cat's Claw Supreme. Those are my top three for those viruses. And then SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Malia, morinda, and golden thread. Those are my top three for bacteria. Sometimes I'll use Illicium if you have like MRSA or bad staph infections. But then if you're breastfeeding or if you're pregnant, VitalGuard and scutellaria are my top two for bacterial infections. A lot of people ask, all right, that's a lot. So where do I start? I always say start broad spectrum. So of all those herbs, the most broad spectrum, in my opinion, is Morinda Supreme. It doesn't taste bad, so you can give it to kids. So I would use Morinda and then choose one of the other ones from whatever. If you feel like you have fungus, try golden thread or try scutellaria with Morinda. If you have parasites, try Malia or try Vedanga or black walnut or Artemisia. If you have viral, try olive leaf or cat's claw. And if you have bacterial, try golden thread or Malia with the Morinda. So you got to really get those bacterial loads down because that's the most efficient way in turning down lipopolysaccharides, those LPSs. And that's the main goal, is to turn that LPS down. The two herbs that turn LPS down, I've talked about them in the autism video. Cat's claw and rosemary are probably my top two. So if you're like, yeah, I really want to go after the LPS, cat's claw and rosemary is probably a pretty good start. But any of those herbs that kill infection will kill the root cause of those LPSs that are circulating. After that, then you repair. So you repair the lining with either glutamine for the small intestine or butyric acid for the large intestine. I like to use Enterovite from Apex in my full script. It's a great butyric acid. And glutamine, Biotics Research makes a good one. It's actually in Inspiracell, but there's many different brands with glutamine. And then you want to get your digestive enzymes working properly because, right, that's your first defense against microbes. So increasing your zinc, your B vitamins, especially B1, and salt. and water. So hydrate, zinc, B1, salt. That secretes your own digestive enzymes. You can use bitters. Bitters will help get your body thinking you're about to eat, and it will increase your stomach acid and gallbladder, pancreatic enzymes too. Okay, next, blood sugar. So video will be coming in the future, but we have to understand to regulate our blood sugar, it depends on what foods we're eating, how often we're eating, and how well we're absorbing them. Because we need to digest our protein to stabilize our blood sugar. Now, all of the protein, all of the amino acids are found in animal protein, specifically red meat. If I had to choose any meat, it'd be red meat and organ meats by far. I wouldn't even have to touch chicken, turkey, eggs, none of that. I would say that red meat is the most nutrient dense and the best protein for blood sugar stabilization. And I would go as far to say that it is nature's antidepressant because of how packed it is of amino acids. But you got to digest those amino acids. So we got to make sure your stomach's working. Go after the gut first, right? If you want help, then I would use Fervita Gastro Digest. You can't break that open and give it to kids because there's hydrochloric acid in there. So for kids, I will use Cellcore CTzyme broken up into something, or Claire Labs Vitalzyme chewables. My daughter really likes the taste of them. They actually taste pretty good. And they have gluten digestive enzymes in them and lipases, proteases, all that type of stuff. But remember, blood sugar is really associated with survival mechanism. So stress will blow your blood sugar because of the cortisol, adrenaline. But think about it. If you're not absorbing your protein and you're eating too much carbohydrates and not like a Mediterranean diet with good fish, animal protein, veggies, sauteed veggies with olive oil, sea salt, fruit in between your meals, and good water. If you're not eating that, eating too much sugar, then you're going to blow your blood sugar. You have to make sure that you're eating proper foods. But if you have too much carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes real high and then it drops real low. And that fluctuation, like I said, is your mood. But when it drops real low, your body goes into fight or flight. It secretes adrenaline and cortisol to raise that blood sugar. Now, your whole life, you're doing this, you're not going to feel good. I guarantee you're not going to feel good. It will catch up with you. I wrote down, maybe don't overtrain. Some people blow their blood sugar by overtraining and not eating enough protein. So make sure you have enough protein if you're going to train a certain way. And then low blood sugar is really, what causes that tug of war between the brain and the body. But the biggest thing to fix low blood sugar is to fix the adrenal glands. You got to fix what the stresses are on the adrenal glands. So I did a whole video on that. We talked about adaptogens. B vitamins are great for adrenals and blood sugar, and going after whatever's stressing them. If you have high blood sugar, then berberine, which is Golden Thread Supreme, Regenerzyme Heart, which has B vitamins and really helps the mitochondria, methylation of mitochondria, and then black cumin oil. Those are my top 3 for high blood sugar. Low blood sugar, find out what's going on with the adrenals and fix that. High blood sugar, those are my go-tos. Fix your lifestyle. And remember, digestive enzymes, like we talked about, GastroDigest, which helps the stomach, gallbladder, and pancreas and small intestine digest your food. But if the gallbladder is clogged due to fungal, hormonal issues, those, and like bad diet, those are the big ones, or dehydration. If the organ is affected, then the emotions of the organ can come out. And remember, the gallbladder is depression. So make sure that the gallbladder is working properly, and that will help with stabilizing your blood sugar too, because you're able to digest your fats and protein. And fats and protein is what stabilizes blood sugar and give you the building blocks to neurotransmitters and hormones. Next, toxins. Did a whole video on vaccines. Really optimize your methylation. The main herbs that I would recommend are Glypho-X, Takasumi, and Schisandra. But I did the whole video on the vaccines, so we can go back to that and watch what to do about vaccines. Foods, they create histamines, right? The HMNT gene is what degrades histamine, and that is off of the that works off of the MTHFR, essentially, the methyl donors. So InspireCell, Regenerzym Heart are the two main ones. You can even do a little SAMe, which I mentioned in the methylation video. It's the universal methyl donor. But one biohack, I guess you can say, is taking Takasumi with your meal will help bind up the histamine and the toxins. But you really got to change that diet and find what those food sensitivities are. And then if you have a ton of food sensitivities, that means your gut is compromised. So find the dysbiosis, repair the gut, avoid the foods for a little bit, reintroduce, and then go about your life. All right. Medications just support liver detox. So Schisandra is a great one. And then methylation, as we've been saying, InspireCell or Regenerzym Heart, my go-tos. But one that I'd say if I wanted to do two products for liver detox, it would be Schisandra and actually Circutonic, Vervita Circutonic. It's really, really good for the liver. So those are my top two. For mold, the topic video is coming in 2 videos from now. The next one will be insomnia, followed by mold. But the 2 binders, Takasumi and Smilax. Those are both really good binders when it comes to living in mold or having mold. EMF, I will say this, if you hydrate properly and you regulate your methylation, I would use Regenerzym Heart in this case, and then you get enough essential fatty acids like cod liver oil. That will help build the sheet, or it's called the myelin sheath, around your nerves, the nerve insulation, which helps protect against EMF. There's also herbs that you can use, but I like to kind of enhance your constitution. So hydration, cod liver oil, and Regenerzym Heart are the top 3 that I will use against EMF. But if you want the herbs, it's Bodyguard Supreme, Rosemary Supreme, and or Woad Supreme, which is an antiviral, anti-radiation. And then you guys have all heard me talk about grounding bags. We use them in our house everywhere. People have sent so many good testimonials on helping sleep because EMFs destroy your sleep. I'll touch on that in the next video and then in the EMF video. But grounding bags are great. The SRT technology, like I said, those optimizers help just strip EMF from your body rapidly. They're really, really good. So those are the 2 things that you can do on top of enhancing your own constitution. And then pesticides. Takasumi and Glyphox and Schisandra, similar to the vaccines. Those are my top 3 for pesticides. And then getting your methylation going, which is the running topic, honestly. You just get that methylation going, which I did the whole video on prior. And then Circutonic, because that's for liver as well. So the binder is Takasumi. If you want to get more in depth, Schisandra opens up those liver pathways. Glyphox is made for glyphosate and pesticides. And then Circutonic is vitamins and minerals that help the SULT, S-U-L-T gene of the liver with phase 1 and phase 2 detox, which is how those pesticides get out of the system. Okay, next, we're almost done, folks. Methylation. COMT gene, that is the number 1 product I find that helps that is Pure Encapsulation Mineral 650 without iron and copper. So the COMT gene people need massive amounts of minerals. That combined with Regenerzym Heart is a really good combination. The MAO gene, which is the warrior gene that degrades your serotonin, that is B6 need and progesterone. So B6 is in every B vitamin, essentially. It's in Regenerzym Heart and InspireCell. Because it's dealing with serotonin, I'd say a little more InspireCell because InspireCell is more neurotransmitter based, Regenerzym Heart more mitochondrial based. And then progesterone, you can do things like Chase Tree and stuff, vitamin E, but there is a cream from Vervita called Natural Balancing Cream, and it's progesterone wild yam based. And you can rub that, I like in fat, so on your glutes. A lot of people rub it in the elbows or on the thyroid. I find that if you rub it into where the most fat is, it's absorbed more slowly and betterly absorbed throughout the day. The GAD gene, right? That's to get from glutamate to GABA. You need molybdenum and selenium. So that is Circutonic. And then the VDR, right? The one that is huge, the rate limiting step of creating dopamine and serotonin properly is Da Vinci Labs ADK, found in my full script. Next is hormones. really all the stuff we just talked about is really how you go after hormones. So refer to the hormone video series and the adrenal video for that. I don't want to have to, really repetition is the father of learning, but that we can just go and watch the other video. Mental stress. This is a big one. My recommendation to you is you subscribe to something that changes your physiology. So the emotional release, the trauma video, the first video I did of the membership, the pulse points, learn how to utilize those. My wife, she goes by Curiously Present on Instagram. She does a lot of EFT tapping. Start doing that. That changes the physiology of emotions. And then essential oils, which I'm going to list right now, which is also in that first video, is for feelings of overwhelm, Immune Harmony. For feelings of chaos, Elite Harmony. Depression is Soar to Soar and Present Moment. Trauma is Royal Wonder. And then heartbreak, anxiety is Heart Harmony. So between all of those, Elite Harmony is a 20% mixture of all of them, but it doesn't have Royal Wonder in there. So if you're dealing with trauma and that trauma brings chaos, that's your mixture. So Royal Wonder and Elite Harmony. If you have trauma and your emotion is depression, then I would do Royal Wonder and Soar to Soar and Present Moment. If yours is you're feeling heartbroken and overwhelmed, that's Heart Harmony and Immune Harmony. So just utilize it however you feel. And the number one way that I find people do the best with them is in baths with Epsom salt. So anywhere between 10 and 40 drops of an oil on the salt dry, and then fill the tub with water and soak each night or a few times a week. That essential oil smell changes the thalamus, changes the fear centers, changes the physiology of emotions. So those are really powerful. But you really need to go after the physiology of the emotions. And talk therapy is a great complement for people with the physiology ones too. So when we talk about NET and finding someone who does neuroemotional technique and some of these techniques, find someone to really help you, that it can be done easily virtually. And then you have the at home with the oils, the tapping, and the pulse points. Anxiety, right? Broken heart. I say people are walking around with broken hearts, not even knowing it. Doesn't take a heartbreak to have a broken heart. And that SRT optimizer, keeping one of those around your heart as much as you can really help the emotional aspect of heart issues, because, right, it's pumping the body full of stem cell frequencies. So emotions are held in your physiology, in your cells. And when you bombard it with good, healthy frequency, it has no choice but to sing back at a much better balanced frequency or tone. And that can change your physiology on emotions, which is a miracle. And one of my biggest mentors, teachers in personal development world, Jim Rohn, he would say, change what you're not happy, or change what is you are not happy about in your life. So is that your job? Is that whatever your thing is that's not bringing you happiness? Get rid of it. And I know it's easier said than done, but your health is above all. So if it's a stressful job, if it's a stressful marriage, stressful whatever, talk it out, find a way. But you got to change. And he would always say, for things to change, you have to change. That changed my whole perspective, because so many times I would say, well, it's this and it's that and it's that. But he would say that you can say all the things are an issue, but the biggest issue is how you respond and what you do with that response. And so for things to change, we must change. Last ones is the basics. So now the basics have to be in place. What I mean by that is fresh air, exercise, sleep, diet, sunshine. Nothing will replace those. You have to get back to nature if you want to overcome symptoms of anxiety and depression. And what the ones that I'm about to rattle off, what they do is they increase something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That is what accelerates brain healing faster than anything. And that is structure dictates function. So what increases that BDNF? 7+ hours of sleep, insomnia video coming next, moderate exercise, sunlight, which, I really also, besides getting your eyes seeing the sunrise, sunset, all that stuff. Red infrared light, those fringe lights mimic sunlight. So get a panel for your place and use it on yourself, because that will help your circadian rhythms, your sleep, all that type of stuff. Cut out the sugar. I use a Mediterranean diet, so good protein, good fat, veggies, sea salt, olive oil, fruit in between your meals, and minerals, right? The COMT, the pure encapsulation mineral 650 without iron and copper. The main mineral is magnesium. You'll see a lot of people using magnesium. My favorite form is magnesium glycinate, but all of those minerals play a role. When we talk about methylation, you need 4 things essentially. You need ATP production, so energy production. You need vitamins, you need minerals, and you need amino acids. Those are what run methylation. And so diet gets you those, not to the full extent. So we have to supplement that diet. And minerals is one of the top, if not the top things. Chiropractic, acupuncture, and craniosacral therapy increase that BDNF. So I get adjusted twice a month, I get acupuncture twice a month, and I get craniosacral twice a month. And I encourage you to do proactive health building by subscribing to those practices. And then concussions. So we can do red infrared light and stuff like that. If you can find a quantum neurology practitioner in your area, it's great for concussion. The nutrients that I wrote down is DHA, which is fish oil, cod liver oil, again, for the win. I wrote down Regenerzyme Heart. Resveratrol helps that BDNF quite a bit, which is Japanese knotweed, or Apex Resvero in my full script. It's a really tasty liquid. I really enjoy that. Rosemary again. So not only does it do the LPS, it also helps that BDNF. So rosemary is a powerful, and it's anti-EMF. It's kind of a win-win. And the last one is turmeric. Turmeric's really good for concussion as well. So fish oil, Regenerzyme Heart, resveratrol, rosemary, and turmeric are the tops. And then I really, on top of having those, so you need that fish oil, that cod liver oil, for the neurotransmitter receptors, right? If you don't have the receptor, nothing works. So a good cod liver oil. I use Vital Nutrients currently. That's the one I'm on. But vitamin D, the VDR receptors, so that ADK in my full script. B vitamins, which is Inspiracell and Regenerzyme Heart. Omegas, we just talked about. And then the minerals. I like that pure encapsulation minerals without the iron and copper. And then on top of them, Albizia Supreme is great for anxiety, depression. It helps heal the heart, and it helps with liver, anger, frustration. Calms. Now, here's the thing about Calms, is what it's upregulating is serotonin and GABA. So if you're on an SSRI, Calms might increase that serotonin, which could make you possibly feel worse. Or you just don't have that MAO, so you just got to add that B6 and the minerals from the COMT, and then you might be able to handle Calms. But the lithium in Calms is for anti-OCD, anti-bipolar, and that actually helps produce GABA, along with the valerian, passion flower, and hops. Those are GABA producers. And that's why so many kids do so well on Calms, is because GABA is so depleted in our society. Then the last one I wrote down was Bacopa. Bacopa Supreme helps brain inflammation. It can really help with ADD, depression, anxiety. So those are a little more of like nature's pharmaceuticals, so to speak, on top of the vitamin D, the fish oil, the minerals, and all that. Last but not least, getting off SSRIs. I will tell you, it can be really difficult depending on how long you've been on them, but it's possible. And I hope this video has brought that perspective change. Now, I will say that when you're tapering off, you should always be under the supervision of somebody, especially a pharmacist, because they really understand the mechanisms. But I would say you go down 1/4 of the dose every 5 weeks. That's how slow you take it. And the main thing you have to do is really just dampen the inflammation to reduce that toxic bucket load. It really is. I mean, when you get your inflammation down, you're able to handle a lot more stuff, especially getting off SSRIs. Get off or dampen inflammation and support your methylation. Those are the most important. So all the stuff that I mentioned, the fish oil, the minerals, the vitamins, the amino acids, right? Like B6 helps serotonin, B3 helps turn tryptophan convert tryptophan and into serotonin type stuff and 5-HTP. Dampen inflammation. If it's your gut, if it's your hormones, you got to get that regulated, and then increase your methylation to proper levels and taper off very, very slowly. So with that, I hope that this video, like I said in the beginning, I hope it landed the way that I intended it to land, but most importantly, the way that you specifically need it to land. So I know that it is tough. Like I said, anxiety and depression can be crippling, but it's a perspective change that might change your whole life. And so that's why I want to do this video. Share this with whoever you think could benefit from this. And this is so many people. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for the support. Much love to you all, and I will see you all in the trenches.